speakers we have joining us today. So as mentioned, I'm Kopano Tholo. I'm a drone expert here at iTOO, and I'll be your host with the most today. And one of our speakers is Thomas Larison, who is a partner at Clyde and Co. We've also got Reese Martin, who is an associate at Clyde and Co, as well as our very own Nhlanzeko Mngomezulu, our specialist claims manager, who'll be taking us through some claims experiences from iTOO. So without wasting any more time, I'd like to hand over to Thomas just to take us through the first section of the presentation.
Thanks, Kopano. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for the IT team for arranging such an interesting session. Good morning, everyone else, and thanks for joining. Through the session today, we'll aim to provide you with a general sort of overview and sense of the drone industry. And we hope to shed some light on the regulatory and licensing framework for drones and the challenges that's holding back the industry's full potential. To start off and to just give you some market insights, the drone industry has experienced remarkable growth and innovation in the recent years. Drones have transcended their military origins and expanded into numerous sectors, becoming a disruptive force in industries such as photography, agricultural, construction, and logistics. The drone industry has witnessed a rapid evolution driven by advancements in technology, increased affordability, and regulatory frameworks that have fostered the integration of drones into various applications. Drones, equipped with advanced cameras, sensors, and navigation systems, offer unparalleled capabilities for aerial data collection, monitoring, and surveillance. Their ability to access hard-to-reach or hazardous locations with ease has revolutionized industries ranging from filmmaking and photography to infrastructure inspection and environmental monitoring. The prospects for growth in the drone industry are immense. Market forecasts indicate that the commercial drone market is expected to experience significant expansion in the coming years, with an estimated value of $64 billion by 2030. Factors such as increasing awareness of drone capabilities, cost effectiveness, and development of specialized applications are driving demand across industries. The agricultural sector is, for example, leveraging drones for precision farming and crop monitoring, leading to increased efficiency and reduced resource wastage. Similarly, the construction industry benefits from drones for site surveys, progress monitoring, 3D modeling, and streamlining project management and reducing costs. The more exciting part is the rise of e-commerce and the need for efficient last-mile delivery, which has propelled the interest in drone delivery services. Companies such as Amazon and UPS are investing massive amounts of money in drone technology to develop efficient and faster delivery methods. Drones have also found their place in public safety, aiding search and rescue operations, disaster management, and law enforcement surveillance. These diverse applications, coupled with ongoing technological advancements, point towards a bright future for the industry. However, there are, of course, several challenges that hinder the realization of the industry's full potential. One of the primary obstacles is the regulatory landscape. Governments and aviation authorities around the world are grappling with developing comprehensive regulations that balance safety concerns with the need to foster innovation and economic growth. Striking the right balance between ensuring airspace safety and allowing the expansion of commercial drone operations is crucial for the industry's progress. Global action to develop a harmonized approach and international coordination in relation to drones are more than worthy objectives. They are essential given the need to accommodate and integrate the international use of drones. The achievement of these objectives is not easy, as the regulation of ever-increasing drone-related operations and activities is proving to be a significant challenge for national aviation safety authorities around the world, not just domestically, but also in a coordinated global sense. It's a challenge that must be embraced and managed. It's generally accepted that one of the key challenges facing regulators globally in fully realizing the potential of drones is their successful integration into non-segregated airspace without reducing existing capacity and while maintaining safety levels currently imposed and minimizing potential dangers to other aircraft, passengers, and other persons and property on the ground. Another challenge lies in public perception and privacy concerns. Drones have raised questions about privacy, data security, and their potential misuse. Stricter privacy regulations and public awareness campaigns are necessary to address these concerns and build trust amongst the general population. Additionally, technological limitations such as limited flight endurance, payload capacity, and the need for skilled operators also pose challenges that need to be addressed through ongoing research and development efforts. So in a nutshell, that's a general sense of the industry. Kopano, if we can maybe move on to the next slide. Thank you. So just to give you guys a sense of the regulatory framework, and I don't intend to spend significant amount of time on this because it will bore you to sleep. At an international level, the convention, previous one, yeah, the Convention on International Civil Aviation, also known as the Chicago Convention, established an organization called ICAO, or the International Civil Aviation Organization. ICAO is a specialized agency of the United Nations, and its main purpose is to develop and publish annexes to the convention containing international standards and recommended practices regarding all things aviation. Some, but not all of these international standards and recommended practices are then adopted into local legislation through what is called civil aviation regulations and civil aviation technical standards. Insofar as drones are concerned, ICAO is responsible for coordinating and developing standards and recommended practices, procedures, and guidance material for unmanned aviation, with the goal to facilitate a safe, secure, and efficient integration of drones into the global civil aviation space. Now, turning to South African law, there are really essentially two pieces of legislation that commercial drone operators will look at. And that is the Civil Aviation Act, which in turn incorporates the Civil Aviation Regulation 101, as well as the Air Services Licensing Act. Now, the Civil Aviation Regulation 101 sets out all of the regulations for drones and effectively applies to persons acting as owners, operators, observers, pilots, and maintenance providers. Next slide, Cops. So Regulation 101 essentially distinguishes between private operations, commercial operations, corporate operations, and non-profit operations, and provides for classification of types of drones together with different line of sight requirements. The classification of drones refers to types of drones that fall within different ranges of energy, height, and weight restrictions. Line of sight refers to different terms describing varying levels of visual contact requirements for operating a drone. Essentially, there are four different terms you need to know, and that is restricted visual line of sight, visual line of sight, extended visual line of sight, and beyond visual line of sight, each having its own restriction. So for private operators are limited to restricted visual line of sight operations with fairly small drones up to a maximum of 7 kilograms maximum takeoff weight. And whilst private operations are exempted from compliance with most of the subparts of Regulation 101 and seemingly the requirement to have a remote pilot license, operators are still required to comply with most parts of subpart 5. For example, a private operator may not use a public road as a place of landing or takeoff, may not operate in controlled or restricted or prohibited airspace, may not release, dispense, drop, deliver, or deploy objects or substances from a drone. Commercial or corporate operations means an operator that either supplies services to a third party or to itself for commercial gain. Non-profit operations means supplying a drone service to itself for no commercial gain. Commercial operations are generally applicable to class 1B, 1C, and 2A type drones. These all include visual line of sight and extended visual line of sight operations with a maximum takeoff mass less than 20 kilograms. There are further classification of drones, which includes beyond visual line of sight operations, and for larger type of drones, more than 150 kilograms, but those are currently still listed as being for experimental or research purposes. And as we've said, or as I've said in the introductory bit, the beyond visual line of sight operations and the integration of those operations and drones into airspace safely is really the key to unlocking the full potential of the industry. Next slide, Cops. So just a short overview of what a commercial operator requires in order to operate a drone lawfully. It will need a letter of approval from the CAA. It will need a certificate of registration for each drone from the CAA. It needs a pilot license, or the person who's going to operate the drone will need a pilot license in terms of Regulation 73, I think. And it will need importantly, it will need a operating certificate issued by the CAA. Now, in order to obtain an operating certificate, the drone operator will also need to submit an operations manual. Now, the manual must contain all the information required to demonstrate how an operator will ensure compliance with regulations and how safety standards will be applied and achieved during the operation. It must set out the type and scope of operations, including the manner in which each type of drone and operation will be safely conducted. Now, of course, depending on the complexity of the operation and the type of drone and whether it is visual line of sight or extended visual line of sight, the operation manual and the requirements to show safety becomes more detailed and more complex. Importantly to note that a non-compliance with the civil aviation regulations may lead to the imposition of monetary fines between 5,000 Rand and 160,000 Rand, as well as criminal prosecution. And more recently, on the criminal prosecution end, the South African Police Services have now issued a number of internal criminal codes that allows it now to actually go out and enforce criminal prosecutions against persons operating in contravention of the regulations. So on the one hand, a commercial operator will need a operating certificate issued in terms of Regulation 101. It would also need an air service license in terms of the Air Service Licensing Act. Now, an application for an air service license is granted if the operator satisfies the licensing council. Firstly, that the air service will be operated in a safe and reliable manner. Secondly, that the operator, if a corporate entity, is incorporated in South Africa, and that 75% of the voting rights of the juristic entity is held by residents of the Republic. And thirdly, that the operator will be in active and effective control of the airspace. Active meaning day-to-day operations, and effective meaning business or financial control of the operator. So that, in a nutshell, is the regulatory and licensing framework applicable to commercial drone operators. It is, of course, a lot more detailed, but there's not sufficient time to get into it. So what we will do is we'll move on to the next topic, which is privacy related issues. And I'll be handing over to my colleague Reese, who will give you an overview of the issues. Thanks, Reese.
Morning, everyone. Thanks, Thomas. Yeah, I think, in this day and age, the drone market is expanding, but there are certain privacy kind of concerns and considerations that must be applied in this context. The way I see it is that although we have a proper and established kind of licensing regime and regulatory regime applicable to drones, this needs to have a sort of consideration for the Protection of Personal Information Act, which is our kind of cornerstone privacy law. And that's why, drone owners and drone operators need to understand that considerations for privacy is kind of earmarked in POPI, and compliance with that is essential. And when companies and your clients start looking at exploring, having drone units and moving into that space, I kind of think of it as an extension of your IT infrastructure and network, and the same considerations that you apply to database servers or networks. You need to have that consideration to your drone operations, because there's quite a lot of sensitive data processing activities that might be conducted with that unit, and that technology is kind of advancing, and there's many different entities that are using it. For example, recently in the news, that the South African police force, they issued a statement to say they have 12 to 15 licenses that were, people that obtained licenses in their unit, and they've established a drone unit to conduct surveillance exercises in, I think they mentioned in the media statement that it was over the Diepsloot area. And it's all good and well to push this technology and to use it and to have that benefit, but it must be balanced with usual people's data privacy rights. And that's why it's more so important to ensure compliance with POPI, to ensure that you're doing your threat assessments and establishing where your gaps are in your processes, and ensuring that the drone owners and drone operators are compliant with the laws, and they understand if there's a potential concern, how to address those in their gap assessments and their threat assessments. And I think in those sensitive processing operations, cybersecurity and updating and ensuring data integrity within your operations is again just another step and advancement of this space. I've been reading reports where drones may not have the same data integrity as manned aircrafts, for example, and there are companies such as SkyGrid, for example, where they're trying to kind of push the boundaries of cybersecurity for drones, and they've actually they're actually first and foremost an AI company which which is a software being implemented in drones to assess when they're being kind of hijacked. How can they address, how does the software kind of assist to prevent that hijacking? So the space is quite new and exciting, and there are people addressing these concerns, but it's to always stay that step ahead, because threat activity in the space is always going to be kind of abreast with the market developments. And the information regulator, for example, is looking at cyber incidences, and although we have yet to see one involving a drone, I'm sure it's only a matter of time. And just earlier this morning, and actually officially yesterday, the information regulator published its first fine against the Department of Justice for the fine was for 5 million rand, as a result of a failure to comply with the enforcement notice that was issued in May. So the regulator, at least on the privacy side, is actively monitoring cybersecurity compliance and POPI compliance, and just ensuring that your network, which may include drone operations is particularly compliant is very important. I would say, just addressing point 4 on the slide, privacy invasion and data subjects' rights to complain is also a kind of space that we see kind of expanding, and understanding that where that risk lies and identifying that. I think Thomas is going to address it in the next slide. But understanding contractual considerations and understanding how to deal with those those complaints efficiently, is assists a company quite effectively dealing with those. So understanding that, understanding what your policy covers, and the iTOO team will cover that later on. But privacy invasion is a section of POPI that's starting to see traction, at least on the cyber incident side that I deal with at Clyde and Co. So understanding that POPI is there, POPI is a consideration that needs to be applied in this kind of greater sphere of regulation is important. And I just want to leave you with one statistic. So according to Cybersecurity Ventures, the global annual cost of cybercrime is predicted to reach $8 trillion in 2023. And they've calculated this to say that if it was measured as a country, then cybercrime would be the world's 3rd largest economy after the US and China. And just to leave you with that kind of food for thought, that making sure that your drone operations, although it's a new and exciting field, just having those kind of cybersecurity considerations and data privacy considerations at the forefront of your development is quite key. Happy to chat further offline, or if there's any questions on the chat, but I'm going to hand back to Thomas. Thanks.
Thanks, Reese. I saw a lot of flurry on the chat box about the compulsory third-party insurance requirements, which I will get to in a moment. But in most aviation-related incidents and claims, there are generally 4 role players that are looked at. Firstly, the owner of the aircraft. Secondly, the operator. Thirdly, the manufacturer, and lastly, the maintenance service provider. These 4 players generally sort of are involved in claims or incidents in one way or another. Now, Section 8.2 of the Civil Aviation Act states that where there is material damage or loss to any personal property on land, which is caused by an aircraft in flight, taking off or landing, damages may be recovered from the registered owner of the aircraft without proof of negligence or intention or other cause of action, as though damage or loss had been caused by his or her willful act, neglect, or default. So the wording, or Section 8 of the Civil Aviation Act, essentially creates a strict liability regime in which third parties on the ground only has to show that the damage was suffered, that the damage suffered was caused by an aircraft in flight, taking off or landing. In turn, Section 8.3 specifically allows a recovery action by the registered owner in circumstances where the damage or loss was caused by the wrongful or negligent act or omission of any other person. So in terms of, if you're thinking about claims in the context of drones, the drone operator or owner, in the event of damage to third-party property, is likely to be first in line, because that's the easier claim to make. And the owner or drone operator is then again in turn allowed to go and recover from any other party that may have wrongfully or negligently caused the incident. So in those circumstances, you think of the manufacturer of the drone in case of a component failure, or the maintenance service provider in the case of poor maintenance and or repair. The third party who suffered the damage will claim from the owner or owner and operator, in this case, the drone operator. And in turn, the drone operator can look to the manufacturer or the maintenance service provider. But given the strict liability regime created by the Civil Aviation Act, risk management becomes, of course, critical. And in the context of risk management, insurance plays a prominent feature. Now, both the Civil Aviation Act and the Regulation 101 requires that drone operators take out adequate third-party liability insurance. There's no meaning to adequate, and it obviously depends on the type of operation that's being provided. But importantly, in terms of the Licensing Act, when the commercial operator is now applying for a license, they need to have certain minimum levels of third-party liability insurance. And I think at the moment, that level is at 2.5 million rand per drone. In my view, that's not a lot. Those minimum levels were set many years ago, I think in 1992, and that act was revisited in 1998. So the levels haven't recently been revisited at all. So when you factor in claims inflation over many years, you need to ask yourself whether those minimum levels are really what's required in the context of a drone operator and potential claims and the extent of damages that could be suffered. But of course, third-party liability insurance is not the only cover that needs to be considered. At least from a commercial operator's perspective, as a basic, you'll need to look at hull insurance, need to look at the insuring any specific or fancy equipment that's on the drone. Mandatory third-party liability insurance, and of course, certain liability protections for pilots. But then from a corporate operator's perspective, and remember, a corporate operator is someone that uses the drone for itself for commercial gain. So think about a commercial farmer that has its own drone operation. Not only does that corporate operator want to cover the hull and whatever fancy equipment is on the hull, it of course also needs to ensure that whatever damage is caused to its own property by the drone is covered. And their consideration needs to be given to the assets policy. And you'll know in most of these asset policies, damage caused by aircraft are excluded. So it's just something to think about and consider depending the type of operation. Lastly, apart from the insurance and getting protection through insurance, contractual arrangements for commercial operators are imperative. Through these contracts, operators could limit their liability potentially. I think it would be an interesting legal debate as to whether, in the context of the strict liability regime through the Act, an operator or an owner can do that. But at least you can, I would think, limit the amount of damages that can be claimed and indemnities for other third-party claims. So contractual arrangements and limits of liabilities in that context can certainly go a long way in affording some protection for the clients. So on that note, I think it's appropriate for me to hand over to Nhlanzeko, who will give us some insight, claims experience, and trends insights. Over to you.
Thanks, Thomas. So I'll briefly discuss our claims experience and some of the trends that we've seen when dealing with claims. So in the past 4 years, we've dealt with over 200 claims with this claims team. And really that has helped us to grow our own in-house talent and understanding of this new industry, but one that is going to stay for quite a long time and which is going to expand also. So this has helped us due to the data that we've gained from these claims. we are in a better position to make proper underwriting and sound decisions when it comes to that. For example, in the type of claims, in the type of drones that we insure, and how we'd like to, or how they're used in the industry. And this could be even when you think about specific type of drones, which are made for specialized purposes. We are seeing a market that's growing to more specialized drones being used for, so drones being built for a purpose. And we have become equipped, or are equipping ourselves to be able to handle those types of claims. But this has also helped us even when it comes to how we handle our claims and how we view our claims. For example, a simple claim where from the data that you have in front of you, you might think that this was a simple pilot error where a drone just ran out of battery mid-air. And you could then say, well, what was the operator thinking? You saw the battery go down, what was going to happen? But the other influences and factors that need to be taken into consideration. And with this claims experience, we'll be able to see, for example, how the wind affects operations, how a certain mode which they're flying in would then affect the battery, the time that they have to return home, and so forth. So I'd say that would be the first trend, is that we as a claims team are now more equipped to handling these type of drone scenarios. But a second trend that we are noticing is that due to a growing market, whenever there's growth in a market, there's more opportunities, there are more players who want to come in, there's more pie for everyone to have a share. And what then happens is that you find a lot of new players coming into the space. And what we've seen gradually in the past 3 years is you have very specific players who were normally just focused on aviation, now coming into this space and wanting to enter the drone manufacturing market. So on our desk, we then have different types of requests where these drones that are now being asked for cover are actually different type of drones, not mainstream drones or well-known drones. And that then would require us to then sort of have additional expertise to help us underwrite those type of drones. So recently, when we've seen non-retail type of drones or drones that are not mainstream, we then get external experts to help us mainly the underwriting process, so that we have a good understanding of that. But it does pose a challenge, because then our claims does become a little bit more complex in handling. We don't have the expertise for that specific drone and the understanding behind it. And sometimes you just need an engineer to actually help you out. So in one scenario where we had a drone which was used for a fire season, what had happened is that drone had a problem of nosediving every time it had to come to land. Now, this was after the first incident where we had paid out the claim, had it repaired by the manufacturer, and then started having a problem for nosediving. So thought manufacturing problem, but no one, not even the manufacturer, could point out what the problem is. But with the help of an external expert, it was then determined just from normal engineering experience, and they could see that the center of gravity for that drone actually was a little bit way forward, which was causing it then to nosedive. So in such a situation, you wouldn't be able to see that from just telematics or data that you're being given. It needs someone to be actually physically there, holding the drone, doing tests on it. So there has been that need for additional expertise, and it's going to continue that way because of a growing market. The third trend that we are seeing is that due to the effectiveness, cost effectiveness and efficiency of drones, more industries are starting to rely on drone and the data that they can get from drones in order for them to make the business decisions or to do some sort of continuity, or enter into a hazardous place which normally a human being you'd send there, but would like to now use a drone because that is less stress of having a human being in there and the liability attached to that. So due to that reliance now on drones, we're also seeing the normal pressures which you'd find in such industries then filter over to the drone operators. So in the telematics that we are able to recover from drones, we can see exactly what step by step a drone operator was doing. And we do find that in some cases, drone operators have put production over safety, especially if it's project-based kind of contracts that they have, where there's certain deadlines that they're trying to meet. And that means them cutting corners when it comes to doing the proper pre-safety checks or pre-flight checks, or even when it comes to operating where there's a deadline, all he has to do is bring a drone back, change batteries and fly it again. But because it's pressed for time, then the wrong decisions are made, and that has resulted in claims. So we do find that that is now filtering over, especially when it's contract based and there are fulfillments that need to be met. The fourth trend, and this is just based on the experience that we've had, is that 90% of these claims that will reach our desk are normally due to physical damage or physical damage or loss that happens whilst in air. Then 10% of it would be the static risk, where it's either theft or accidental damage whilst on the ground, things are missing. But from this 90%, what we have realized, especially in the past 2 years, is that the cost of repairs has increased from about 30 to 40%, which means repairing drones now is 40% more expensive than it was 2 years ago. And there are many factors pushing this. It could be a shipping side, demand on that side. It could be inflationary pressures. But what we are then seeing is that due to this increase, sometimes operators or the owners of these drones are opting just to go for a total loss on these. But if we do see, and when we're doing these assessments, do see that it is more valuable to actually do a total loss, or it doesn't make sense to do a repair on that, we will then meet the insured halfway. But this increase in cost now obviously also would in our underwriting considerations also be placed. And then the fifth trend that we're seeing, and based on our experience, out of these 90 in-flight type of claims, sometimes immediately or after some time, we do find that 3% of it could result or do result in a third-party claim. Now, policy does allow for third-party claims where it is based on property damage, but we also do have noise liability or privacy, as Reese was privacy breach, as Reese was alluding to. We haven't seen any in privacy breach or in noise, but definitely in third-party property damage we have seen. And really, there is that need for that cover because really it can be accumulative, and this could result in problems for an insured, especially considering that most of these drone operators are businesses that were started from the ground up. They're not that big. They're not big commercial businesses, so they really do rely on insurance to be able to help them there. So this third party aspect is quite important. And just on the next slide, we'll show how, even though there's a low severity of these liability claims, but the accumulative exposure and the severity of it can, at times, it can put a business, drone business out. So in this example, we had a drone operator who was contracted to do crop spraying on farm, and there were contractual agreements there. Then what had happened was that whilst operating this agricultural drone, he flew into a power cable that was on the field. Drone fell onto the sugarcane field, and then basically that picture on the right, you can see the damage and to that sugarcane field. So now you have an insured who has a total loss on the hull or the equipment that they're using, including whatever was on the payload. You have a liability claim that could come from Eskom for those damage to their power cables, and you have another liability claim that could come from the farmer or whoever the contractor, or yes, whoever contracted you out, or whoever property that is. And this can then be accumulative. So it can then end up being something that an insured cannot handle on their own. So there's a lot of risk management that needs to be done, even down to the level of the actual operator. Before operating, what are my risks that are around? What do I need to look out for? And just think, what could go wrong? If it could go, if you think of it, it probably can actually happen. So there's a need for operators to be a little bit more risk management wise in understanding what is around them so that they can manage their risk. But at the same time, that's why you have insurers also who you can pass on that risk by getting the type of cover and the proper cover that's in place. So that's what we've seen on a claim side, and in the near future would have much more insights as this industry goes. But for now, I'll hand over to Kops, who will just give a brief overview of our policy. Sorry, Kops, you're on mute.
Sorry.
Tequila.
Apologies for that. Thanks a lot for that, Nhlanzeko. Obviously, just taking us through some of the claims trends we've experienced here at iTOO over the past 4 years, which we've been part of the business. And obviously, that does help us, obviously, in improving our product and offering to our clients. So just to take you through, obviously, the iTOO underwriting requirements, obviously, to get from the information we require to give a client a policy, is would require a UAV proposal form to be completed by the client. As well as mentioned earlier on by Thomas, we do require a copy of the remote pilot's license, as well as the copy of all the UAV certification of registration. So all the drones which need to be, which are going to be on cover, need to be registered with the South African Civil Aviation or the Civil Aviation of whichever country obviously you'd be operating in. You'd also need a copy of the RPAS operation certificate. In order for you to operate commercially in South Africa, you need to operate under ROC. So we need the details of the ROC to also be shared with us. Sorry. All right. In terms of the iTOO UAV section of coverage, so our cover is comprising of 3 sections to cover. Section 1 covers you for the physical loss or damage to the UAV, inclusive of the detachable and non-detachable payloads. So we cover you for, this is your in-flight risk, which we cover you for anything which is attached to the drone and the drone itself, whilst it's in operation in the air. We will give you cover. Our section 2 covers you for any physical loss or damages to the UAV payload or spare. So anything obviously which you would have on the ground, so your additional cameras, your additional LiDAR scanners, which you'd have, as well as your spares, which would be attached to the drone, will also be covered under our section 2 of the cover, whilst they are not in operation on the ground. For any accidental damages in transit theft as well, would be covered applicable to section 2 of our policy. Section 3 covers you for any legal liabilities to any third parties. So this is the most important part, obviously, for any drone operator operating commercially, operating as an NPO, operating as a corporate organization. You do need liability to be in place. As we've mentioned before, the minimum required, which was set back in 1992, is 2.5 million. liability cover, which we do offer. So this will cover you for any accidental third-party injury or death, any accidental damage to someone else's property. So once again, as mentioned, 2.5 million is the minimum that you're prescribed to have in place. However, based on obviously the scope of work which our clients are taking care of, proper risk and due diligence needs to be taken into consideration, because some of these clients are operating on large spectrums of farms. And you need to ask yourself, is 2.5 million liability proper for my clients, obviously, to operate in such an environment? Because as Nhlanzeko mentioned, that with the claims example that he did have, we had a section of the farmer's field burned, and obviously we could have an ESCOM claim as well from the power line which has been damaged. So this is also where careful consideration and careful advice which needs to be given by the broker to the clients in terms of obviously how much liability is required for certain jobs. With some of the requests obviously from the film industries, you are stipulated upfront in terms of what minimum liability you need to have in cover, which obviously if you have a client which is our client on board, we're able to assist you with any contractual legal liability which is required for you to take part in any operation. And as mentioned, some of the extensions we do have applicable to our policy, we do have hull worn risk. So whilst your drone is in the air and it gets stoned down or shot down or during any riots, our policy will extend to cover that. We also do cover you for hull war liability as well. So the liability from the people in the crowd obviously shooting down your drone, and any liability damages which the drone might cause on someone else's property or someone else's it might cause death to someone, land on someone, we will extend to cover that. We have got a UAV operators liability extension, which does cover your operators for any hull damage, and it also extends to cover any your operators for any legal liability, obviously for operating under your banner. We also do have digital asset liability, digital assets cover, which covers you for the cost of redoing your shoot. So specifically that cover, obviously, if something happens during you doing a survey and you lose the data, obviously, or the work that you have done on that day, we do have an extension on our policy to cover you for the reshooting or the resurveying of that specific job. So this doesn't mean, obviously, you have got a cyber policy within our drone policy. One thing I always do mention to my clients that, and what I'm realizing is, so with drones, it's kind of interesting. Drones are a data collection tool. So one thing as a broker, I'd say to my clients, you must always make sure that your clients also have a cyber policy in place. If you're collecting any data, so for any surveying purposes, any precision farming or any mining activity that you might be doing, a cyber policy just to protect yourself for all the data. It's quite important data that you're collecting on behalf of some of these organizations, which obviously is you're going to have a channel to feed back to the companies. So a cyber policy would be applicable, although it's a separate cover from obviously our drone cover, which we have on our side. And then with additional extensions that we do also have, as Nhlanzeko did mention, we do have an invasion of privacy, which is quite important in our cover. It's standard cover we do give. We've also got a privacy and a noise liability extension as well to our product. So as I regard our product as the Rolls Royce of drone insurance, we do obviously cover our clients extensively, and we do our proper risk management to obviously to see which areas our clients would need coverage with. So yeah, that is a brief overview of our cover. For our iTOO cover, which we have in store for you. So that would be the end of the presentation on our side. I note we do have a couple of questions which have been posed, and I did note a couple of hands which were raised during the presentation. This would be the time we have left, obviously, for that interaction to answer any questions. Ferguson, kindly assist us with obviously just noting out some of the questions.
Kopano, if I just before you go, and I just saw some questions in the chat box about the mandatory third-party liability insurance, and just to provide some clarity there, and just to be more specific, as I've said, in terms of the Air Service Licensing Act, an operator will need a license to operate. In terms that act, or through that act, government published what they call the Domestic Air Services Regulations. And it is in terms of these regulations that specifies minimum amounts of third-party liability insurance, amongst other things. And there are two that are possibly applicable. The first one, as I've said, is 2.5 million per aircraft, and that applies for all aircraft with a maximum certified mass of 2,700 kilos and less. The second possible one applies to micro light aeroplanes, which is a 500,000 Rand minimum. At least in my own view, I don't think drones classifies as a micro light aeroplane. And for that reason, I would say it falls into the category that requires 2.5 million minimum third-party liability cover. So I hope that clarifies some of the questions.
We have another question, Kopano, from Herman. He is asking, do you offer liability cover in terms of chemical drifting?
In terms of, thanks for that question, Herman. Really interesting one, which we are seeing quite often come up from our agricultural crop spraying clients. So yes, our liability does extend to cover the drifting of chemical onto the other plants. What we don't cover is the incorrect dispensing of the chemical itself on our policy. Hope I've answered your question.
And the next question we have is from Sean. He's asking, with civil unrest during a grid failure, would you cover it?
Yes, thanks a lot, Sean, for that question. So with civil unrest, obviously, if our client is a security operator operating in that area, we would be able to cover for, if the, I'm assuming the question is around, obviously, how war risk, if the drone is shot down or stoned down, our cover will extend to cover that.
Okay, and another question from Daniel. He's asking, do you insure hobby flyers clubs?
Okay, thanks a lot, Daniel. So currently, obviously, our cover isn't extended to offer cover for any hobby flying. We only at the moment are covering commercial operations with our policy.
Okay, those are the only questions we had. Thank you, Kopano.
Thanks a lot.
So we have another one on Teams.
Okay.
Sorry about that. So we have a question on Teams from Matthew. He's asking, do you provide cover for drone manufacturers' product liability?
So thanks for that question. On our policy itself, we just cover the commercial, the operation of the drone. So in terms of the manufacturing of the drone components for a product's liability, that question would have to go directly to our general liability team. So on our side, we just cover the operations of the drone in flight. In terms of the manufacturing, I think the best place to ask that question obviously would be from Susie. If Susie is on the call, she could probably assist us with answering that question.
Is Susie on the call? I don't see Susie. Go.
I'm not sure from our side, but I'll pick it up with the general liability team, obviously, to ask them the question in terms of will we be able to cover the manufacturing of the drones itself, and then we'll respond accordingly to that question.
I will drop Susie's email on the chat.
All right. Thanks a lot. Any more questions we have for ourselves?
So there's another one in the Q&A from Teresa. If a client only uses it for personal use, so as a hobby, and has not registered it, can insurance be arranged?
So thanks a lot, Teresa. For that, as the iTOO commercial operating cover, we wouldn't be able to grant cover for the client. However, I do note that there is some insurers in the market which are keen on taking in personal use drones.
Yeah, just to highlight the whole hobbyist query. because, and this goes back to what Thomas had spoken on one of these slides, because the private use is technically not regulated in the sense that you don't have to meet certain criteria for flying. Unfortunately, it is a high risk. With what we've seen and type of claims that we've seen, all you need to do is just go onto YouTube and it will scare you to death. But unfortunately, due to that, there's not much regulation around it. We, at this moment, we're not in a position to take it on.
And yes, a special thank you, obviously, to Kim James, who joined us on the session. Obviously, she is a representative from KUASA. Thanks a lot, Kim, for joining us. Hopefully, the next iTOOsday we could have you as one of our speakers to obviously tell us more about the organization and what you guys do, obviously, for the drone space. But yeah, if we haven't got any more questions, unless I did note that there were a couple of hands raised during the session. I'm not sure if the people would still like to ask the questions that they had.
We can just answer one final question, then we can close. We have a question. The question is, making YouTube videos, would that be classified as private or commercial use?
So, I think Thomas can answer this again, just going to
yes, I think it would depend. If you're making a YouTube video that generates some sort of income through YouTube, then arguably you're doing it for a commercial gain, and you would likely be classified as a corporate drone operator, not necessarily a commercial operator. So remember, commercial operators are someone that provides a service to someone else. But of course, it depends. If the YouTube videos is for third parties, then you might also be a commercial user or service provider. But if it's just for your own videos, then it's likely just to be personal or private. Kim and I are on the same page.
Yeah.
Which is good.
100%.
Okay, thank you for that. We can close it there, Kopano.
All right. No.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot to everyone for joining the iTOOsdays, and thanks to our speakers, Thomas and Reese, obviously, for giving us some regulatory information, obviously, from your field of expertise. And thanks a lot for everyone for joining